School governors face a wide range of challenges whilst attempting to manage their schools successfully. This programme focuses on a team of governors tackling some of the legal responsibilities that they may have to face. Our panel has been placed in the role of new governors at a hypothetical school. They'll be shown a sequence of 3 reconstructed events, each developing a dilemma facing the governing body. Their challenge after each stage will be to use their experience to discuss their duties and how best they could handle the situation. Meet the panel. Tanis Jackson, an LEA governor and former additional governor, with 12 years' experience including 5 as chair. Peter Crawshaw, a community governor with 8 years' experience. And Kath Carline, a parent governor beginning her 2nd year in the role. Keeping a close eye on the proceedings and assessing the governor's performance is Paul McGann, an education officer with 15 years of experience supporting and training governors and troubleshooting problems in schools. How will the team handle the challenge? The panel start by watching the first reconstruction of events. A group of pupils arrive at school before normal opening hours. One pupil is injured after being hit in the face by a stone fired from a catapult by a second pupil. The former head teacher had previously banned pupils from bringing such items onto school property, and they've been confiscated in the past. He'd also ensured that the playground was monitored by a member of staff before school. However, a new acting head teacher, the former deputy head, has been running the school for about 3 months, and he's struggling with the workload. On this particular day, the designated playground supervisor called in sick, and a replacement was not found. The panel begins with a general discussion of some of the details of the case.
Well, I think it probably happens a lot, this sort of thing, when children bring things into school that they know they shouldn't bring into school. But it's just unfortunate that someone was injured on this occasion.
And it seems also remarkable that there wasn't more in the way of backup cover for the playground supervisor. You'd have thought that in the chaos of children arriving at school that one would expect more than one person to be responsible anyway. So
you can't expect one supervisor to see everything.
Exactly.
But I just wonder how, how early it was. I mean, if it's half an hour or so before school officially opens, I don't really know if the school's culpable there. It's a bit of a tricky one, isn't it?
Well, we certainly got the situation that it wasn't so early that the playground supervisor wouldn't have been on duty if she hadn't called in sick.
One of the important issues that our panel has raised is the responsibility of governors for the school site at times when the school isn't open. While it's not clear in law whether governors have a direct responsibility, governors do have responsibility for setting the times of the school day and the times when the building will be open. So I would be interested in the governors asking, at what time were gates unlocked, at what time do children normally come onto the premises? And governors would have responsibility if they know that things are occurring during the morning for changing them.
What do you think about the acting head?
Well, I was thinking there is actually a wider issue as well with regard to the school management. It says here that he's the acting head teacher and he used to be the former deputy head, which suggests that there was a certain amount of chaos before he became appointed as acting head.
I got the feeling that the former deputy, who was now acting head, was snowed under because he's not experienced. Yes, exactly.
Well, he's not experienced, and clearly there wasn't a proper build-up towards the previous head leaving. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a need to have an acting head teacher.
No, it was obviously an emergency
place.
situation.
An emergency situation
yes.
of some kind.
But I think you're right. I think there's wider issues about staffing levels. Because if he's snowed under, he needs some support and some help. And, of course, this playground supervisor business needs attention as well, because I think you're quite right. One person in a school like that would not be sufficient.
Our panel have raised the issue of the effectiveness of the staffing levels within the school. And, of course, it is important whenever a head teacher is absent for any reason that appropriate acting arrangements are put in place. It's also important that the governing body take that opportunity to look at staffing levels throughout the school, because if a deputy acts up to headship, then someone has to act up for the deputy, and if you're not careful, things can get lost. So our governors are right to raise this issue with the school.
I wonder what the health and safety policy of the school says and how accurately and stringently it's implemented. I wonder how we could perhaps amend the policy to make sure that these sort of things don't happen again. As governors, we would be responsible, wouldn't we?
And if there's been a very loose health and safety policy, it certainly needs tightening up.
Most authorities have got a health and safety policy which all
Yes.
schools can adopt, and then you tweak it according to your own circumstances, I think.
Well, that's
but,
right.
We need to make sure ours has been updated and looked at.
The governor's role is to monitor the implementation of policies, isn't it? That's what we do. We don't actually go around doing it. We have to ensure that the policy is implemented correctly.
Yep.
Our panel have drawn a distinction between the health and safety policy and the implementation of that policy. It's very important that whenever governors adopt policies, they consider how they're going to be implemented and monitored. Otherwise, they just become ineffective documents gathering dust on a shelf. It's very difficult to monitor a health and safety policy, but there are a number of ways in which governors might attempt this. One is to have a governor specifically responsible for health and safety who can draw up a very good relationship with maybe a deputy head teacher or the premises officer within a school. Another way to test the effectiveness of the health and safety policy is to try out case studies and have discussions on the governing body which would test whether the health and safety policy actually would cope with some of the circumstances as they arise. And advice can always be sought from the local education authority health and safety officers.
Emily, shall we find out what happens next?
Yes.
When the pupils responsible are questioned about the incident, they claim the catapult does not belong to them but was found on the school playing fields. The school's next to a rough estate, and it's not the first time dangerous hazards, including broken beer bottles, have been found on school grounds. None, however, has previously resulted in injury. The school is currently easily accessible to members of the public out of hours. The parents of the injured pupil claim the school is failing to put its health and safety policy into practice and threaten to sue for negligence. The reconstruction provokes a debate about school security.
But certainly, yes, I do think we need to look at the fencing and the school security, because that could lead to all sorts of intruders coming in as well. You've got all sorts of potential hazards, not just missiles, but you've got other people, undesirables, walking onto the school premises.
Yes.
Are we aware of what fencing costs?
Yes.
Our schools had to have fencing, and it's just absolutely colossal, and budget will not allow.
That's right.
It's, you know, in a perfect world, we'd all have our children fenced and we wouldn't have needles and all that business, but we live in today's world, and the money is not there to suddenly say, right, well, we'll have a fence around this school then.
Yes.
That would cost thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds.
You see, you can't have fencing and CCTV. I think both are, you know, incredibly expensive. I don't think there are many schools that have got both of those things.
It's very tempting for governors to think that there are only two options, doing nothing or spending large amounts of money. But I think parents would want to know that the school had considered a wide range of low-cost, short-term options which would make the school safer on a day-to-day basis for pupils. If the governors know that the school is widely accessible and that some of the activities of the community pose a danger to pupils, they cannot just ignore this. It may be a question in the short term of advising pupils about which areas of the grounds are accessible to them in the mornings. It might be an issue of staffing or closing off particular areas until the school can be sure that they are safe. In the longer term, the governors may want to consider a range of strategies for making the school less accessible to the local community. And here I think they would want to take advice from the local police and also local education authority health and safety officers. A fence is an expensive, but maybe one of only a number of options that are available to governors.
The panel moves on to the risk of legal action in our case study.
I'm assuming that when you're talking about threatening to sue for negligence, what most people would do is get a solicitor's letter written to the school, and quite clearly this needs legal advice as to an appropriate response.
I think any threat of that nature needs to be sent to the authority and let them deal with it.
The authority would be the one who carried the can in terms of legal responsibility.
But I would have thought that if the governors can evidence that they have written, reviewed, implemented, monitored a health and safety policy,
Yes.
that is all they can do.
Yeah,
and they have fulfilled their responsibilities.
The more one can operate without legal issues having a horrible place in the forefront, the better.
Oh, absolutely.
Our panel have raised concerns about the risk of being seen as negligent and legal action being taken against the school. The best defence against this risk is that proper risk assessments are carried out, perhaps with appropriate advice from local authority health and safety officers, for example. This both reduces the risk of being sued, as people will see that you're behaving in a reasonable manner, and also provides some defence if legal action is taken. It doesn't mean that things can't ever go wrong or that there aren't lessons to be learned whenever there's a dangerous situation in a school, but it does minimise the degree of concern that governors need to have about this issue.
The panel moves on to watch the final reconstruction. The school caretaker has always made an effort to keep the grounds free from dangerous items. However, he now complains to the head that his job is taking him longer and has become more dangerous as the number of hazards has increased. He claims he doesn't have enough time to complete his other regular tasks due to this extra commitment. He's also worried about coming into contact with trespassers on his own. The head brings the issue to the governing body for discussion and guidance on how to proceed. The panel discussed the question of the caretaker's safety.
It's saying it's taking him longer and becoming more dangerous because of the hazards. Then he needs some protection, some advice, some support, some equipment to enable him to carry out these duties safely.
What would we do if he comes into contact? What advice would you give him, really? He shouldn't be trying to tackle trespassers by himself, should he?
No.
His point about being worried about coming into contact with trespassers on his own is a really important and relevant point, and especially given the nature of the estate which we've heard about.
Yes.
He's extremely vulnerable.
I think this thing about trespassers is quite significant, because we know, don't we, we read in the paper all the time about incidents that start off as nothing and finish up with very serious consequences. So I think he would be advised to maybe ask somebody what they were doing and nothing else.
The panel raised a very significant and important point about the job description of the caretaker. It's very important that any individuals that are working with a school have clear expectations and guidelines as to what's expected of them, and these should be within the confines of a health and safety policy. So the caretaker needs to be given very clear guidelines as to what to do when trespassers come onto the school, which should not under any circumstances include tackling them individually. If these guidelines are not clear and accidents occur which involve the caretaker, then the governors and the local education authority are exposed to more legal risks.
It might be worth trying to include the local community. You know, go out into the community and try and help them to understand the problems that you've got.
There's a wider point, isn't there, about the involvement of the community beyond the involvement of the school as such, because we know it's a very rough estate. It's something that the local police need to be concerned with in terms of possibly having community wardens of some kind.
The governors may be able to have a role here, to go out into the community and talk to people, and maybe recruit a governor from this rough estate, and then they will distribute the message. They will circulate the message. We don't need to do it.
The more involvement the local community have in the school, the more likely they are to be protective of the school and its interests. Getting the community involved in local clubs and societies, using school facilities out of hours, are good and effective ways of reducing the amount of vandalism.
And finally, Paul McGann sums up the key issues.
Being a governor of a school is not always about dealing with difficult issues, but when they do arise, it is important that governors seek appropriate legal advice. The best defence against legal sanctions is to be seen to be doing everything reasonable to prevent dangers from occurring within school, and the best way to do that is by carrying out appropriate risk assessments. It's important as well to consider that health and safety is only one of a large number of important issues that governors have to deal with, and it's important that health and safety is balanced against the other priorities of the school, which are essentially standards and teaching and learning. Finally, governors have a really important role to play in cementing relationships between the school and the local community. Governors are largely made up of members of the local community, and the more involvement that the community has in the work of the school, and the more the work of the school is in the community, the better relationships are going to be, and the less likelihood there's going to be of serious issues occurring.